take me inside. I mean, your paper has some incredible reporting on what we might be able to intuit at this point, that the president's focus is not the humanitarian potential for disaster, but on his political fate, which in his eyes is tied to the performance of the stock market. Take me through what you guys have reported and anything you know about what's happening later this evening.
That's exactly right, Nicole. The president has been fixated on the decline in the stock market the last few days because he's been told again and again, and it's become ingrained in him, that the strength of the economy is going to be his ticket to re-election in November. And so he is very focused on the economic impact of the coronavirus, much more so than the state of the public health problem itself, even though his own administration and his own government have been trying to get their hands around this crisis. But it is indeed a problem and a challenge for him because he has been at war with science, at war with facts for all 3 years of this presidency. He has gone after the budgets of some of these agencies. He's tried to diminish the power of some of the public health and science officials in the government. And this is a moment when he needs them and he needs their expertise. And we're going to see at 6 o'clock what he has to say to the American people about the threat ahead.
I thought about some of the depictions of Donald Trump in your new book with Kara Lennig when I thought about what Trump alone in his head might be wrestling with. The two most primal instincts that have driven every decision and utterance as president are the desire to goose the stock market, to have it, as you said, perform in a way that reflects well on him and his presidency, and the desire to shut the border down when there's any risk from anything outside. How do you foresee those two forces inside Donald Trump himself clashing in the coming weeks?
Well, I hate to make predictions, Nicole, and we're going to see for ourselves in a couple hours here, but you're certainly right about the pattern here. This is a president who looks inward, who tries to cut out foreigners, has repeatedly tried to shut the border. He passed that travel ban, of course, early on in the first few days of his presidency. And, you know, I don't know what's going to come over the next few days in terms of the decisions that he might be making, but his instinct in moments like this is to look inward, to protect Americans as opposed to reaching outward and having a more internationalist response like the kind we saw from the Obama administration during Ebola.
You know, Frank Figliuzzi, Donald Trump has addressed his extensive record of public comments around Ebola, and I covered him at the time. He advocated keeping and blocking and closing down the borders and keeping American doctors and nurses, really the best among us, who traveled to help treat victims of Ebola. He said that he won't respond the same way because Ebola was more deadly. And while we can hope that's the case, what is to you sort of the risk landscape for people who have to travel for work, for people whose families come in and out of the country? I mean, what is sort of the non-hysterical reality check on trying to navigate life if it involves travel with a president who any morning could wake up, see something on Fox News and tweet something alarming?
Well, first, I see inextricably linked to this question of how Americans are going to deal with this and plan business travel or personal travel and their domestic lives. It's linked, unfortunately, to trust. In other words, we're going to get our information from this administration. And the problem now is that our institutions have been attacked so severely and so frequently by this administration that we're going to have difficulty trusting the information we're being provided. So getting the right information and trusting it is going to be the key to making the right decisions for corporations, for families, and others. The second filter that I see here, because that's how I look at the world, is national security. We're beginning to hear reports of U.S. troops, U.S. military member in South Korea, for example, becoming ill with this, dependents of troop members becoming ill. If this starts to impact our fighting capability, if this starts to impact troop readiness, if it moves to the first responder community, entire police departments, paramedics, EMTs, it becomes a national security issue. And right back to that trust factor, Nicole, we need to trust the information we're going to get tonight from the president, from the CDC, and we need to own this. He needs to own it. It's a bit like the boy who cried wolf fable, where, you know, when it's time to actually tell the truth, no one's going to listen to you. He needs to restore that trust tonight, and I hope he can do it.
Well, Frank, I guess what you've set up is what's already underway. Donald Trump's close ally, so close that he awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Rush Limbaugh, is already on the warpath against CDC officials, accusing the sister of Rod Rosenstein, who served as Donald Trump's deputy attorney general, as being part of some conspiracy to tank the markets. I mean, that is underway. We are already in a situation where the information has been tainted, if not contaminated, by Trump's very powerful, in terms of that reaching that Trump base, allies in the media, calling into question people's ability to trust information from the CDC.
The politicizing of intelligence was bad enough, right? The attacks on our justice system, court system, bad enough. But we cannot afford to politicize public health, particularly if a pandemic is on our doorstep. So, look, panic never helped anyone. I have been a part in the FBI of mass distribution of medication plans, setting up of distribution centers, handling first responder health. The plans, the American people need to understand, the plans are in place regardless of administration and who's in charge. The career professionals have rehearsed this thing. The problem with this one, as your scientists and experts far better than me will tell you, is, look, there's no mass distribution of meds. We don't have a vaccine for this. Yeah. We're not even certain how to properly test for it, and we're not certain how quickly or the nature by which it spreads. That's the unknown factor that this administration has to focus on in order to gain the public trust.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.